It's our hockey insider, Darren Dreger. Dregs, we've been talking about this. This team has a lot of UFAs, a lot of things to get done. Are you surprised this is the deal that got done first?
Not necessarily surprised, but this is good work by General Manager Patrick Allvin, because there was a sense out there that Filip Hronek could be somewhere around $8 million. So to get him locked in long-term, 8 years at 7.25 AAV, that is good value for the Vancouver Canucks, because here's a player who can play in all situations and does play in all situations. He's age perfect, and probably most importantly, Jay, is the fact that he's a perfect complement to the captain, Quinn Hughes. I mean, they're partners on the ice, so when you want to look at the long-term success of the Vancouver Canucks, it's not just about a piece here or there. It's making sure that when you know you've got a good fit, you do whatever you can to make that a longer-term fit, and the Canucks have done that with Hronek.
Do you see any trickle-down effect for the pending UFA defenseman that they still have to sign? That's Tyler Myers. Yeah. That's Nikita Zadorov.
It's going to be a challenge, right?
Yeah.
Zadorov would like to stay in Vancouver. I'm sure that Tyler Myers would like to stay in Vancouver. And even though the salary cap, as we know, is going up to $88 million, there's going to be tough decisions now moving forward on that blue line for Allvin. There'll be ongoing discussions with both camps, with Zadorov and with Tyler Myers. But I know you're going to ask me about Lindholm, because he has to be factored into all of this as well. And as much as the Canucks brass would like to keep the band together, they're not going to have the resources to do that. I think Zadorov would be a priority, as long as that camp isn't overly greedy.
Right.
And maybe this message with the extension with Hronek sends a bit of a message that, look, there are players who maybe left just a little bit on the table, so consider that if you want to stay.
We'll see if Zadorov's agent, Dan Milstein, will determine things to be fake news or real news as we continue toward free agent frenzy in less than 2 weeks, and Steven Stamkos still not signed, Dregs. Any update on that situation? I know they'd love to get a deal done.
There really isn't an update, but I wouldn't read too much into that either, though, Jay. There is a mutual interest, of course, from both sides of getting this done. And when you think of Steven Stamkos, you think of an iconic player in the National Hockey League, but really the face of the franchise for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So there'd be some form of commitment, I would think, from ownership of the Lightning. But Stamkos is also coming off a brilliant year. You know, people think he's in the back nine of his career. Didn't look that way.
No way.
Last season.
Yep.
But it's not unlimited salary cap space for Julien Brisebois and the Tampa Bay Lightning. So many believe they're going to get something done. There's ongoing dialogue. I mean, that's a little bit cliche this time of year with July 1st looming, but they just continue to talk at this point.
Last week, we talked to you about the possibility of Jake Markstrom and the Ottawa Senators. We haven't heard much about Jake Chychrun lately, though he's in the back of our mind because, you know, going to the final year of his deal. What's your sense on the situation between those two?
Yeah, look, I mean, we speculated a lot on the future of Jake Chychrun and the Ottawa Senators leading up to the trade deadline. But, you know, whether it's semantics or not, you always need to qualify with certain players. And Chychrun is one of those whereby I don't believe that Steve Stamkos is shopping Jake Chychrun. He certainly didn't shop him at the trade deadline, but we know that the Ottawa Senators would like to improve in goal. We know that they'd like to add some pieces up front, maybe tinker a little bit or do more than tinker with their blue line. Well, how do you do that? I mean, if you're acquiring value, you've got to give up value going out the other way. So we're going to talk more about Jake Chychrun, probably some other Sens players leading up to the draft, which is now right around the corner, and then into free agency.
Now, you kicked up a little bit of a storm on Monday, a tiny little storm. You mentioned on TSN radio in Toronto that you believed Brad Treliving would like to sign Mitch Marner to a contract extension. Do you care to elaborate on that?
Well, look, I mean, there are three scenarios that could unfold here, right? So I'm going to qualify my position on all of this.
Okay.
An extension is a possibility. Why wouldn't it be? You know, even though Leafs Nation, you know, loves to just kick sand on Mitch Marner, especially during the postseason when things don't go the way of Marner and the Maple Leafs, he's viewed as an elite-level talent around the National Hockey League. So there's got to be some form of contract extension discussion after July 1st.
Right.
Trade is a possibility, even though Marner, of course, controls all of that with a no-move clause. And the other scenario could be that Brad Treliving, the Toronto Maple Leafs, simply allow Marner to play out the remainder of his contract with the 1 year remaining and consider extension or other possibilities after that.
Right.
Not position A from a Leafs perspective, because now you're allowing Marner to go to the open market July 1st of 2025. But he's a really good player for the Maple Leafs.
Yeah.
And if they don't get fair value in return, a package that encourages Brad Treliving to take that offer to Mitch Marner via trade, then you got to sit tight and be patient. And Leafs Nation is going to have to brace for that.
And maybe they'll just have to wait and see how the team does this season. Yeah. That might change things as well. Restricted free agent Martin Necas remains a member of the Carolina Hurricanes. You guys mentioned him with the Habs, maybe a connection there with Montreal last week on Insider Trading. I'm curious if that's all we're going to see from Montreal. Do you see Kent Hughes and company doing even more as we head into the draft?
Well, it's possible, right? I mean, there's an element of heat that will elevate here as you go into next year in Montreal, because that fan base has been incredibly patient. Mm-hmm. So the expectation is, okay, it's not just about turning the corner. It's about, at the very least, nibbling at a playoff spot in the East, and that's going to be a challenge for the Montreal Canadiens. So, yes, Kent Hughes is going to look to add some pieces, and, it's not dissimilar to what we just talked about Ottawa. If you're trying to bring in a Martin Necas or a Trevor Zegras from the Anaheim Ducks, well, what are you willing to part with? And normally, if you're Carolina or Anaheim, you're probably looking for a futures element to that. So is that a top prospect? Is that draft picks with the draft right around the corner? Is that a young NHL roster player? What I would say is that Kent Hughes works hard. He makes his calls. He's inquired on both of those players. But the conversation between Montreal and Anaheim, Montreal and Carolina, who just, by the way, named Eric Tulsky their general manager, hasn't gone beyond in the inquiry stage. They're not actually negotiating terms of what a trade might look like, but that could happen.